Skydance's new dark fantasy adventure has been a long time coming. After convincing gamers that Skydance was the real deal with cinematic rail shooter Archangel, then pivoting to the Walking Dead IP with two highly praised Saints and Sinners games, they announced Behemoth, originally slated for a late 2023 release and then delayed a full year until today. This one's been in the oven for quite a while, but outside of giving some serious Shadow of the Colossus vibes, no one was quite sure what to expect. Fortunately, I've been able to play it for the last few days before and after launch, and I have a lot of thoughts. We play as Ren, a cursed warrior fighting through the Forsaken Lands to take down the monstrous behemoths. They're said to be the source of a curse that plagues the land, but as you'll soon find out, despite the game being called Behemoth, there aren't actually that many of them, and they're not even an integral part of the moment-to-moment gameplay in Behemoth. Instead, you'll be traversing a pretty linear path, climbing, fighting marauders, exploring to find collectibles, and learning to use your fairly versatile grappling hook to get from point A to point B, break stuff, and solve puzzles, all of which we'll be talking more about in detail as we move forward. But let's start with some first impressions, and it has to be said that Behemoth looks stunning. Everything's being displayed in high res at a native 90 frames per second, but somehow the detail in the environments hasn't been sacrificed because of it. Whenever you're outdoors, there's always something epic looming on the horizon, and more subtle details like snow and wind effects just add to the immersion. And with this being a Skydance game, the big budget seen in the visuals also extends to the audio. Every character has something to say before attacking, the clanging of swords sounds great, each combat scenario is paired with an appropriate soundtrack, and the variety of the ambient background music here has to be applauded, feeling like something you'd expect from a AAA flat screen game, not a $40 VR game. The wow factor does kind of eventually wear off though as you travel endlessly through snowy mountains and similar looking areas for hours. And just when you reach what you'd think is the next biome filled with lush grass and beautiful water, they say, all right, now head off and go fight the next behemoth. And as soon as you walk through that door, you're dropped into the next area, which looks suspiciously a lot like the first. But as with a lot of things in Behemoth, the more you play it, the better it gets, and the more great things you'll see. Alright, so let's dive into the combat. You're able to carry a handful of throwable daggers, swords, bows and arrows, all the stuff you'd expect from a dark fantasy title. Although as you progress, you'll find 3 core weapons, and these are the only ones that can be upgraded, so after a while you'll learn to stick with these more than the random weapons you take from the Fallen. Although there are a couple of very cool weapons to find and wield along the way. And for the most part, blocking, parrying, and attacking works well enough. And remembering to use the right weapon to destroy armor before being able to take down opponents does add a little variety to the proceedings. And if you're the type of gamer that likes to make their own fun while playing and get involved in creative kills by tossing your enemies into spike walls, grappling trees and throwing them across the environment, or releasing boulder traps onto a group of marauders, that's all here. Although for as much as it seems like it's going to be a big part of the game later on, it doesn't really end up being so. And if you played Behemoth at launch, you'll know it felt weird that you had to take down hundreds upon hundreds of marauders, but you were always hampered by the Saints and Sinners stamina system. Fortunately, in update 1.003, all that's been changed, and the stamina system has been completely rebalanced, making the player feel far more like the brute Ren is supposed to be, making the long treks between each behemoth way more fun now. The mini-bosses are always going to be a problem though. See, you've got a limited moveset and they can run circles around you, which meant that instead of studying their movements for patterns I could exploit or waiting for an opening that caused them to be vulnerable, I was just spamming R2 like my life depended on it, utilizing the extra strength rage ability that turns your vision black and white and lets you chop your enemies apart, even right in half if you want to. And thankfully this has a fast cooldown that lets you kill marauders and mini-bosses with just a few hits. It felt like I was cheating my way through the harder sections, with literally 0 skill required. But I wasn't cheating, this is just how the game was designed. If you're looking to practice combat, there's a separate arena mode, which even in the menu they're saying is in beta, which is good because so far it's pretty basic. You're locked into one arena and you fight wave after wave of enemies using weapons that are laid out for you and health that's strewn around the arena. Now look, I only played this mode once and only made it to round 5, but the AI here isn't what I'd call intelligent. I never noticed this kind of behavior in the campaign. Anyway, it's a cool idea, and if Skydance really wanted to give swordsmen a run for its money, they could expand this arena to include climbing and some of the traps like the spiked walls and the trees you could grapple from the main game. Currently though, it's nothing worth writing home about, but I'll be curious to see how this mode evolves. Fortunately, it's not all combat all the time. Behemoth has plenty of mandatory puzzle-solving segments, a lot of them including big blocks that you push around onto pressure-sensitive plates, and yeah, I know, we've been doing this in video games since the original Tomb Raider back in 1996. But in VR, it does kind of feel new again, especially when combined with the grappling mechanic. And you've really got to give it to Skydance for giving us a pretty cool way to move around this world. Being able to grapple and swing our way to our destination is always appreciated in VR. And while it's a cool way to travel, especially when you get areas that really test your ability to grapple from one point to another in quick succession, it does feel super floaty considering you're supposed to be this heavy brute decked out with armor. I still love it though, and hopefully if we ever see a Behemoth 2, they'll keep this mechanic around and improve it even further. None of the puzzles here are too difficult and they're always a welcome change from the action. But honestly, I found the best parts of Behemoth are the ones that you might not even know are there. I loved exploring and finding hidden paths, which almost always led to a collectible or extra resources. There's even some completely optional areas. This entire tower took about 8 minutes for me to work my way through, and you could just walk right by it, never even knowing what's inside. Alright you guys, so far I've been trying to keep this review relatively spoiler free, but during this section I am going to talk about and show off a little gameplay from the second Behemoth battle. So if you consider this a spoiler, make sure to close your eyes or cover your ears, or just skip ahead to the timestamp on screen. If you think it's weird that we've gotten this far into the Behemoth review and haven't really talked about Behemoths yet, well, that's not unintentional. I just wanted this review to feel like the game that it's a review about. Meaning, there's only a handful of Behemoths throughout the course of the 11 hours it took me to get to the end on the normal default difficulty, exploring every corner for collectibles and upgrades, which means that it only took me about 90 minutes to get to the first Behemoth, then about 4 hours to get to the second. That's some bizarre pacing, and making it so much worse is just a ton of story delivered through voiceovers whenever finding collectible skulls and tomes, along with the appearance of the occasional NPC. And honestly, I have no idea what anyone was talking about. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention, but the narrative here just didn't do it for me. Anyway, back to the Behemoths. The first Behemoth feels like a tutorial, and despite a little climbing and an awesome sense of scale, the whole encounter felt far too scripted to really rope me in. Now this all changes by the time you get to the second Behemoth. It starts off as a standard boss fight, which, if you know me, I love boss fights and feel like their absence from VR games recently has been a major issue. So I was happy that even this part was here, but then it evolves into something straight out of Shadow of the Colossus, where the Behemoth itself becomes the level and actually starts delivering on our expectations. And it can be so immersive that if you've got any issues with height, you might have to pause occasionally and lift the headset up just to ground you a bit like I did. The whole experience is just epic. These highs are so high that they almost negate any smaller issues I have with Behemoth, making it something you just need to experience for yourself. Speaking of the smaller issues I had with Behemoth, I know a lot has been made about some of Behemoth's launch day bugs, and yeah, rightfully so. I experienced quite a bit of environmental pop-in, and even moments where, after killing the last enemy in a combat arena, the gate to the next area just didn't open. Heck, even the blood was black. And I know some of you out there commented saying that you really didn't experience many bugs at all, and some of you commented talking about bugs and crashes that I never even saw. So I know a lot of people out there had it even worse than I did. It's frustrating, and this is the kind of stuff you'd expect to be patched and ready for launch. The good thing is that most of what I experienced has been taken care of in the last few patches, and if you're playing Behemoth now, a lot of those issues should be addressed. The blood's no longer black, there's way less pop-in than there used to be, and the crashes should be fixed. I have no doubt there's still plenty of bugs remaining, but I think we can all agree that if this was the game we got at launch, there would be far, far fewer complaints. Listen, I know a lot of us were hoping that Behemoth would be a 10 out of 10 game, and would take everything that Saints and Sinners did, improve on it, and give us everything we wanted from a VR version of Shadow of the Colossus. But this isn't about our expectations. It's about the game that Skydance actually delivered. And when I take a step back and take in the whole experience, I have to say that Behemoth is something special. There's plenty of combat, weapon upgrades, puzzle solving, and the grappling mechanic made everything old feel new again. But it's the actual insanely impressive Behemoth encounters that prove Skydance was willing to take risks, deliver something we've never seen in VR before, and made the entire journey not just worthwhile, but practically essential.